they are decimating an entire nation now and trying more or less to reach the ulterior motive of driving all the Palestinians into the Sinai Desert, especially those who live in Gaza, cede the West Bank and kill the two-state solution.
Do you accept that a ceasefire is never going to happen, I suppose, while the hostages are still being held? That the calls for a ceasefire may come from a legitimate place for many people, but ultimately it's impossible to ask for a ceasefire while hostages remain held by Hamas?
Well, basically, you know, when you talk about hostages in a crisis situation, I think that could be a bargaining leverage for Hamas. And the ceasefire will facilitate the process of exchanging prisoners. That's the normal way of dealing with hostages. But to put a condition to release the prisoners and accept a ceasefire, I think this is something that Hamas is not going to accept, because there are no international guarantees that they will stop the fighting and the naked aggression against innocent civilians in Gaza.
It's naked aggression against Hamas terrorists that can cause death to civilians in Gaza. There is a distinction there.
No, what Israel is doing is killing innocent civilians in Gaza with flattening all buildings, with indiscriminate killings. Half of those who have been killed in Gaza are children, 50% of them. How can Israel justify, its self-defense by attacking hospitals, by trying to cut electricity and what have you? And we don't need to repeat the saga, because we today would like to see a position by the international community to put pressure on Israel to stop this carnage and to start allowing humanitarian assistance to people, especially for 1.4 million displaced forcefully by the Israeli attacks. So the onus should not be put on Hamas, who are in tunnels where collective punishment is being exerted on the Palestinian people, and to justify that they are pursuing Hamas militants while they are decimating an entire nation now and trying more or less to reach the ulterior motive of driving all the Palestinians into the Sinai Desert, especially those who live in Gaza, cede the West Bank and kill the two-state solution. There is a political agenda behind this.
But
it's not a question of revenging Hamas and what Hamas has done, sir.
But the proximate cause of this is the decision by Hamas on October 7th to go into Israel and kill 1,400 people, to take 239 hostages. They then go back and hide in tunnels, but the responsibility for what's happening now surely must rest on their shoulders. Whatever else went on over history, which is a perfectly legitimate discussion to have, the proximate cause of this was a decision by a terrorist organization to kill 1,400 people. That is the thing that set this off. They have to bear responsibility for that, surely.
Well, actually, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict does not start with October 7th. Violence breeds violence. People who have been under blockade for 16 years with minimal and frugal resources, what do you think their reaction would be?
But their action doesn't have to be to kill children, to kill babies.
Well, kill children. 4 wars have been waged against the people in Gaza, killing them, decimating them. You don't consider those onslaughts by the Israeli state terrorism. And now you're talking about one incident to justify the indiscriminate killing of civilians en masse now in the eyes of all the international community. All televisions are showing that they are massacring children. The question is, you go back to the root causes of the conflict. This is how you decide to resolve a conflict. It's not by action, reaction, a cycle of peace, a cycle of violence, and then putting the onus on one militant faction to justify the eradication of a whole nation. I mean, how do you call this? I mean, where is the moral ground of the international community that takes one side of the story and not the other side of the story, and try more or less to portray the historic narrative of the Israelis and putting the occupier on the occupied on equal footing? This is ridiculous. I mean, this should not be the approach of the international media mainstream. We should look for solutions rather than putting blame on one side against the
I
other.
think the international community would say that the temporary solution is a pause to allow humanitarian aid in. The secondary thing is to allow Israel a legitimate military objective, which is to remove Hamas. And then a third is some sort of political settlement that gives ability to live to both Palestinians and Israelis. That feels like the three things that people are calling for: a pause, the right to eliminate Hamas, and then some sort of two-state solution. Presumably, you agree with that to a certain extent.
Well, let me tell you, yes, I agree to a certain extent. But the question of removing Hamas is like 10/0 undefined in algebra. They are not going to remove Hamas because Hamas is an ideology. It's not people just fighting Israel. It is an ideology. It's an Islamic fundamentalist ideology that believes in the resistance of occupation. They believe that these occupiers should leave the land. For the last 75 years, they have been occupying them. Now, if you kill a leader, another leader will come up. If you kill 100 militants of Hamas, thousands of militant Hamas will come. I mean, the idea of really trying to fool the world that they are going to chase Hamas and get these militants out of Gaza is something absurd, because it's not going to happen, my friend. Who is paying the heavy price today? The Palestinian innocent civilians in Gaza, let alone the West Bank. You're forgetting the West Bank.
No,
Things are burning in the West Bank, and things are going to ignite very soon.
And do you believe, just to finally leave it here then, that I talked about this of the two-state solution. Do you believe there is a world in which there's a Palestinian territory, there is Israel. Israel has a right to exist. Palestine has the right to exist in a two-state solution. Is that what you fundamentally believe and look for? Do you accept Israel's part in that? Israel has a right to exist within that.
Yes, sir. We have accepted Israel's right to exist in 1988 when we have declared the independence of Palestine on the borders of 1967. We have had the Oslo Accords, in which eventually 78% of Palestine will be the state of Israel, and the remaining 22% will be the state of Palestine. We have been endorsing this for the last 30 years, but nobody was listening to our President Mahmoud Abbas, that the question of a two-state solution is being buried by the building of settlements and the expansion of settlements and the creation of new facts on the ground. We have been saying that violence is going to increase if Israel does not stop from its land grab and land theft. Still, it is doable, but looking at the situation now, we see a non-contiguous geographic entity of Palestinian land in the West Bank, where it will be impossible to have now, at this stage, an independent Palestinian state, because this geographic integrity and without the connection to Gaza and East Jerusalem will be a far-fetched object. But we believe eventually that a political solution is the solution and not the military solution. And the only game in town is the two-state solution.